Boker Tov. Good morning, morning. Today's Daf Yomi is Shevuos Daf Hamadal, Shevuos 34. We're going to start on 34a, around 10 lines from the top, where the Gemara is continuing a discussion that how do we know Shevuos Edus only applies to a case where there's a claim for money. That was the case that the Gemara brought yesterday. And the Gemara brought four positions that they gave four different reasons. Now, let me say at the beginning that our daf is dedicated for a Shmir for the Chayalim, Atzal V'Suyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael. And we're also learning Eloi Nishmas, Yuri Finkelstein Zachrono Bracha, and also Eliel Moshe Zimbalist, whose yahrzeit is today. So the Gemara cited four different Tanaim who gave different reasons as to prove that the oath of testimony only applies where there's a monetary claim. There was a position of Rebbe Eliezer who learned it from Xer Shava of the fact that O appears twice by Shevuos HaEdus and also by Shevuos HaPikadon, by an oath of a deposit. And since Shevuos HaPikadon was with money, so too Shevuos HaEdus is with money. And even though the word O appears also by Rotseach, by a murderer, and by a Sota, there Rotseach, it has to be learned specifically from Edus, from Pikadon, because both of them there's a Shvua, and both of them there's no Kohen. By Rotseach there's no oath, and by a Kohen there's no, and by Sota there's a Kohen. So Rabbi Akiva is the second one, and he learned it out from the fact that it says by Shvuas Edus Achas Mi'ela, one of these, meaning to say that there are some in which you take an oath and you'll be exempt, and that's if there's no monetary claim. Yossi Aglili learns it out from the fact that it says by Shevuos Eidos, Ru Eid Ora Yada, that it says that therefore it's a testimony that can take place with either sight or knowledge, and that refers to a monetary claim. And Rabbi Shimon learns it out from Xer Shava of Techateh from Shevuos HaPikadon, from Pikadon to Edus. So now the Gemara says, Ma'askifla Rabba Bar Ula, around 10 lines up from the top on 34a. So Rabba Bar Ula challenges, says, Bitoy, the words don't only, this is a question on Rabbi Eliezer, they don't only apply to Shevuos Edus, they also apply to Shevuos Bitoy. So why don't we're not from, just like Shevuos Bitoy doesn't only apply to money, also Shevuos Eidos shouldn't apply only to money. So the Gemara explains, so the Gemara says, Bitoy yochichu. So the Gemara says, Sha'oen v'yesh iman Shvuah v'ein iman kohen v'darim shlo b'tvios mama. Why don't we learn it out from Shevuos Bitoy, where it also says, and also there is a Shvuah there, and there's no Kohen, and there it's not necessarily monetary claims. So the Gemara says no. It's more logical to compare Shevuos Eidos to Pikadon, Shekain, because they have these commonalities. And what are the commonalities? Because the commonalities are Techat. Shekain, Techateh. Both by Shevuos Eidos it says the word Techateh, and also by Shevuos Pikadon says Techateh. So it's more logical to compare it to Shevuos Pikadon than Shevuos Bitoy. Gemara says Adarabah, just the opposite. Mi Bitoy Hadaleilmev. It's more logical to compare Shevuos Eidos to Shevuos Bitoy. Shekain Chatos Michatos, because in both Shevuos Eidos and Shevuos Bitoy you bring a korban chatos, but by Shevuos Pikadon it's a korban asham. Gemara says El Mistara, so logical. I'll give you a different reason why we should compare it to Shevuos HaPikadon. Mipikadon Havalei Melov Shekain Chait B'Mezid and Tave V'Kafrei V'Avrei, that there have these four commonalities. That in both cases the word it says Techateh, both by Shevuos HaPikadon and also by Shevuos HaEdus, and both of them you're liable for Shevuos HaPikadon and Shevuos HaEdus even if you do it b'mezid, that unlike Shevuos Bitoy, where you're going to be exempt from carbon if you do it b'mezid. And also Tave V'Kafrei, in both of them by both Shevuos Bikadon and Shevuos Eidos, you're only liable if there's a taina and a kfira. There has to be a claim against you, and you have to deny it. And it's not the case with Shevuos Bitoy, then there's no taina and a kfira. And Avram, both of them, it's about the past, unlike Shevuos Bitoy, which can also be about the future. The Gemara says, Ad Rabba mi Bitoy, just the opposite. We should learn out not from Shevuos Eidos, but from Shevuos Bitoy. Shekain chatas sheyardo lachomesh. And what does this mean? That this, in both cases, both by Shevuos Eidos and Shevuos Bitoy, they're liable for a chatas, but by Shevuos Apikodan it's an asham, so that's one. And sheyarda, both of them, it's a carbon all of the ori. By Shevuos Bitoy and Shevuos Eidos, it's this variable sliding scale carbon. And also chomesh, that by Shevuos Apikadon, and by Shevuos Apikadon, you have to add on to the fact that you have to make restitution. You have to add on 1/5. Whereas by Shevuos Eidos and Shevuos Bitoy, you don't have that. So the Gemara says, no, Hanach Nafishin. It's more logical to compare it to Shevuos Apikadon, which is 4, and to Shevuos Bitoy, which is 3. So that's the first idea. So now the Gemara says, let's analyze what Rabbi Akiva said. We said in the Brayso that Rabbi Akiva said, it says by Shevuos Eidos vayaki Hashem la'achasmi. Remember, Rabbi Akiva says, how do we know that Shevuos Eidos is only by money? He says because it says la'achasmi, and yesh me'ela shu chayav, yesh me'ela shu patur, which means to say that by the Shevuos Eidos, there's some that you're liable and some that you're exempt. And which is the ones that you're liable? Okay, it's a tevo mamon chayav tevo davar achar patur. That only if it's a claim for money are you liable, but for something else you're going to be exempt. So therefore, we see from here, that's a source according to Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara says, why do you say from here that you're exempt if it's not about money? Maybe it's just the opposite. Maybe that if the claim is for money, you're exempt. And if it's for something else other than money, you'll be liable. So Rabbi Akiva says, no. He says, how do we know this? Oh, and Rabbi Eliezer Samach. You're right. Rabbi Akiva is not just basing it upon this achas mi'ela. He's also relying upon the fact that there is a Zera Shava to compare it to Shevuos Bikadon, like Rabbi Eliezer did from the words "oh" that appear twice by Shevuos Eidos and Shevuos Bikadon. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, Rabbi Eliezer is the exact same thing as Rabbi Akiva. So my benayil be Rabbi Eliezer be Rabbi Akiva. So if that's the case, what's the distinction between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva? The Gemara says, "Ika benayu mashpia ede karka." That the distinction between them is if you do a Shevuos Eidos about a claim for real estate, you say, come and testify for me about a claim that I have on real estate. That Rabbi Eliezer chayav and Rabbi Akiva patur. And according to Rabbi Eliezer, you're going to be liable, and according to Rabbi Akiva, you're going to be exempt. Meaning to say, since Rabbi Akiva learns it out from achas mi'ela, so Rabbi Akiva says that there are also some cases by a monetary claim we will be exempt. And this is where it's a claim about real estate, that even though there's about money, they're going to be exempt. Rabbi Yochanan de Amar Has, Rabbi Yochanan, who says later on in our Sugya on Daf Lamed Zayin, Mashpia Ede Karka Fil Rabbi Eliezer Patur, and there even Rabbi Eliezer says you're exempt if the witnesses are about real estate. So if that's the case, Hacha Ma'ika Bain Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva. Then, if that's the case, what's the distinction between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva? So, according to Rabbi Yochanan, Ika benayu ede kinas. If they're testifying about a penalty, not about a compensatory claim, and they say we don't know about this kinas. According to Rabbi Eliezer, he would say you're liable, just like if you made a claim that you denied about a deposit, you'd be liable carbon. Also by Shevuos Eidos, you'll be liable for a carbon. But according to Rabbi Akiva, you'll be exempt. So then the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Remember, what did Rabbi Yossi Aglili said? He said, "V'hu eid o ra'a o yada." So since it says a witness if he saw or if he has knowledge, which means that the pasuk is referring to testimony that applies with either sight or knowledge, because it says o ra'a o yada, and that's referring to money, because money you could either know about it or see about it, as we saw in yesterday's daf. You know about it, you heard it in mission, or you saw the money change hands, but you don't know the full context. So Amar Papa Abaya Lema Rabbi Yossi Aglili Leislay the Rabbi Acha. So let's say the Rabbi Yossi Aglili who says that any testimony other than money cannot exist unless there's Re'iyah and Yediyah, unless there's sight and knowledge. So the Gemara says, let's say that he does not agree with the position of Rabbi Acha, who Leislay the Rabbi Acha, who's of the position that you don't always need sight. You can do it also if you just have an estimation that that's what occurred. The Tanya Rabbi Acha Omer, and we had this Bryce remember we had this back in Baba Basra, we also had it in Sanhedrin. Gamal Ochar Bain Hagamon. If you have a camel that's working amongst all the other camels, at that moment it kicks. V'nimtza Gamal Harog B'tzido, and all of a sudden we discover another camel dead next to it. Even though you didn't actually see it kill it, you know that this camel is the one that did the killing. Rabbi Acha, because if you would agree with the position of Rabbi Acha, we can also find this case by Dina Nefashos, by a capital case, we could have a circumstance where the testimony can be valid with knowledge, even without sight. And that would be the case of Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach. The Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach, Arab ben Nechama. Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach says, Arab ben Nechama is an oath, I'll never see the comfort of Jerusalem. I'll never see Jerusalem rebuilt. And I one time saw a person run after another. He's basically taking an oath. I saw somebody run after another into a destroyed building. I ran after him. I found a sword in his hand. And the blood is dripping. And the person who was killed was going through like a death rattle. He was just killed. Shimon Shetach said, Rabbi Shimon Shetach said, either you or I killed him. What can I do? Because your blood is not handed over to me. What can I do? The Torah says that you need two witnesses, and I didn't actually see you do the execution. So God will pay you back. And Amr was, and he said that before he even left, a snake came and bit this murderer and killed him. But we see from here that we know for sure in this case of Rishon ben Shattach that this man killed him. And according to Rabbi Acha, why? So in this case of Shimon Shetach, where Rabbi Acha just requires an umdina, he just requires basically our evaluation of the situation. You don't need to actually see it. And also, you should say you're liable in this case of Shimon Shetach. And if Rabbi Yossi holds like Rabbi Acha, why does he say only in the case of money do we say that even without knowledge and without sight? Also, by capital case, you don't need complete sight. So we see from here he doesn't hold like Rabbi Acha. So the Gemara says no. Afilu teima islay to Rabbi Acha. You could even say he agrees with Rabbi Yossi agrees with Rabbi Acha that you can make a umdina. You can make an umdina. You can make this evaluation, but nevertheless, Rabbi Yossi's at the position that this verse by Shevuos Ha'edus applies only to a monetary case. It's possible that you could have knowledge without sight, mishkachas law. You can have that by other cases. Where could you have sight without knowledge? Don't you need to know? You need to know who he kills. If you just see somebody killing the person, that's not enough. You need to know if he killed an idolater or a Jew. Did he kill a treif? Who's basically a dead man? He's not liable. So you can have by a capital case knowledge without sight, according to Shimon ben Shattach and Rabbi Acha, but you can't have sight without knowledge. So the Gemara says, so we see from Rabbi Yossi Agluli's position, Shema Mina, we see from Rabbi Yossi who says that Shevuos Ha'edus applies only, that Shevuos Ha'edus applies by a monetary case where there's sight without knowledge and knowledge without sight. Because Savar Rabbi Yossi Agluli Mashpia Yedei Kinas, Potter. It must be the Rabbi Yossi Agluli must be of the position which we debated in yesterday's daf, that if the Shevuos Ha'edus applies to people who are Edei Kinas, that they're testifying about a penalty, and they deny that they're exempt. Because if you're going to say that they're that must be Ede Knas liable. And okay, granted that we can have a case where they have knowledge without sight. Let's say, first of all, they're aware that this person, let's say, assaulted a woman and he owes 50 silver coins, and they didn't see the action, but they know it clearly. Like, for example, they, through circumstantial evidence, but re'iyah below yediyah, but sight without knowledge, how would they ever have such a case? Because they have to know the circumstances in order for a kanas to apply. Milo by Meida Nachris Baal or Bat Yisrael Baal or Basula Baal or Bula Baal. They need to know the circumstances or else, and the context, or else you can't say whether or not there's the full kanas and the full penalty in the case of an assault. So doesn't this prove that Rabbi Yossi Aglili does not hold by kanas, mashbi'eh de kanas, that you're liable? So Yosef Rav Hamnuna. So the Gemara is going to bring now several cases where you can have a monetary case and they don't have sight or knowledge. So we'll see that from the cases. Yosef Rav Hamnuna kamei Rav Yehuda. Yosef Rav Yehuda becoming by. Let's say we have the following circumstance. Mana menisicha. He says, I gave you $100. Bifnei poni. Gave you $100 in front of this person. The Eidim Rona so b'chutz, and the witnesses see him accepting it. But so he says, I gave you $100, and witnesses see you accepting it, but he didn't see the witnesses, and so therefore they don't know if it's a gift or a loan. So what's the law? Is it the case when they come to testify, their testimony is valid or not? So they have the sight, but they don't have the knowledge. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Hamnuna, V'hala ma'atoen. The defendant, what's his claim? If he claims that it never existed, well then huchsa kafrin, then we know that he's a liar. And so therefore we don't believe him when he says, yeah, it existed, but it was a gift. V'yamar in shakli v'di shakli. But let's say he claims, yeah, I got the money, but it was my money. Also ate in my hobby. Well, what are the witnesses? If the witnesses come, who cares? Because they're only testifying to him getting his money. But he says, I got the money, but it was my money. So I'm nuna at to at. So he says, basically, Rav Hamnuna says, what's your question? I don't even understand your question. So Rav Yehuda says to Rav Hamnuna, meaning to say, you could come into the base medrash. You've established a situation. It totally depends on context. So he says, At Wolta, you're worthy to come into the base medrash because you're very smart and I accept your words. The Gemara brings another incident. There's a person who said to his friend, He says, I lent you $100 next to this pillar, and it was a loan. And and the defendant says, says, I never walked by this pillar. Also, then two other witnesses came and said, yeah, you were by that pillar. We saw you urinating there. This guy's a liar, and therefore he has to pay back the money. So Rav Nachman, Hi Dina Parso. What are you talking about? Your law here, this is a Persian law. It's not correct. I mean, it's a Mika Amar Me'om. He never says, I never walk by that pillar. Ace exec on what you're saying. I never walked by that pillar with respect to this incident. So, meaning to say, I wasn't talking. I wasn't thinking in my life I never walked by with respect to this incident, and I never walked by it. Alternatively, Yehuda there was a person who said to his friend, he says, I lent you $100 by this pillar. This time he says, I never walked by there. The witnesses came and said, yeah, you urinate by there. Amar Rav Nachman, he's a liar. Amar Rav Nachman, Kol Milsa the law, Ramyo in the Inish, no, that's not a proof that he's a liar, because anything that a person really doesn't focus on, you can't expect him to know. And yeah, it's possible that he walked by that pillar that he urinated there, but you're not going to remember every pillar you urinate by. But if you got a loan there, you would remember. So he said it never happened, so that's not a proof that he's a liar. Rabbi Shimon Omer. So now we come up to, we saw Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi. Now we're in the fourth position How do we know that Shavuos Eidos only applies to money? That's Rabbi Shimon's position. Rabbi Shimon says, Chiev kan, the Chiev bepikodim. Rabbi Shimon says, it says the word, it says, at first he wanted to compare it to Shavuos Bepikodim, but Rabbi Shimon pushed this off because of the fact that by Shavuos, that from the fact that the Torah was more lenient by Shevuos Apikodim from Shevuos Eidos, and so therefore he learns it out from the fact that it says Chiyuv Tam Chiyuv Apikodim. So I was back on Lama Gimel, Rabbi Shimon basically learned it out from Xer Shava Tachtaf from Pekidon to Pekadon from Pekadon to Eidos. So Machkol Ebim Larava. So the Chachamim laughed at Rabbi Shimon from the Brisa. So why did they laugh at Rabbi Shimon? So let's go back to see Rabbi Shimon's position in the Brisa. So Rabbi Shimon says, Omer Chayev Kan, Rabbi Shimon Omer Chayev Kan, Chayev Pekadon. It says that by carbon Shavuos Eidos you're liable, and also by Pekadon it says you're liable. Just like Pekadon you're liable from the claim for money, so too also by Shavuos Eidos. And then he gives another Kal V'chomer that Shavuos Pekadon has all these cases where you're all these requirements which Shavuos Eidos doesn't. And the Gemara rejected that Kal V'chomer because Shavuos Pekadon has certain leniencies. And so therefore, in the end, they learn out from Techatet. So when Shimon said this position, they laughed at him in Eretz Yisrael Ma'achulka. Why were they laughing at him? The Katani, because the Brisa says that you can't learn Shavuos Eitz from Shavuos Pikadon, because Mala Pikadon Shkein will also by Mushba Kinishba, because by Pikadon, it's only if somebody else makes you take an oath. You can't take the oath on your own. So in that case, it's more lenient. And also, they didn't do a Mezei Keshogeg, because if you do the Shavuos Pekadon amazing, you're exempt. So that's why I rejected it. So the Gemara says, well, they laughed at him in Eretz Yisrael because they said, Michte, Mushman Piazzo, Be'edus, or Rabbi Shimon Nale. Where does Rabbi Shimon know this whole din of Shavuos Eidos by Mushman Piazzo, where you take an oath on your own from Shavuos Eidos? How does he even know that? To come from Pekadon, he learns that from Pekadon. Pekadon Nami Mushman Piachirim Nigmar. But also Shavuos Pekadon, where does that learn out from Eidos? So therefore, why does Rabbi Shimon say that Shavuos Pekadon is only an oath if he takes it on his own? It's also mipiacherim. And why were they laughing? Because Dilma Rabbi Shimon b'kav chomer ma'isila. So the Gemara says, why were they laughing? Dilma Rabbi Shimon was dealing with the kav chomer. He says if you're liable from others, for sure on your own. So that's not a reason to laugh. Elachuka. So why were they laughing? Amazing kashogig, that the fact that he says that Shavuos Pekadon you're not liable, amazing kashogig, intentional like accidental, but you are by Shavuos Eidos. The Katani Mala Pekadon Shekain Loasa Ba Mushba Kanishba amazing kashogig, that by Shavuos Pekadon that if you did the Mezei Keshogeg, you're not liable, but by Shavuos Eidos you are. Milchte, but the Gemara says Mezei Gabe Eidos. How do we know that by Shavuos Eidos, if you did intentionally, you're liable? To look Be'ben Elam. It doesn't say that you have to do it accidentally. So also by Pekadon, Achinanu looks Be'ben Elam. Also by Pekadon doesn't say Be'ben Elam. So the Gemara says Amar Rav Huna, my Kukas. Rav Huna says, why are they laughing? Dilma Mezei Delav Keshogeg Pekadon. Maybe this idea that if you do it intentionally, if you Dilma Mezid Delav Keshogeg Bipikadon, how do we know that Mezid is not like Shogeg Bipikadon? How do we know that? Maybe he learns it out. Maybe Rabbi Shimon Gomerle. Maybe Rabbi Shimon learns it out not from Shavuos Eidos, but by the law of Me'ilah, because by Bipikadon it says Umma'allah, and also by Me'ilah, and so therefore. Just like if you do Me'ilah B'Kadshim, you're going to be exempt, intentionally you're exempt from a carbon, also by Shavuos Pekadon. So the Gemara says, V'hainu Chuka, and this is why they laughed. Why are you learning out from Meila that you're exempt from me? They learn from Eidos that you're liable. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a reason to laugh at Rabbi Shimon. It's more logical to say that you should compare Pekadon to Meila. Shekei Meila Meila, because in both cases says the word Ma'al. Other Gemara says, Eidos have a should compare it to Eidos, Shekei Techta Mitechta, because they have the same word. Gemara says, no, no, it's more logical to compare Shevuos HaPikadon to Me'ila because we have all these commonalities. In both of them, we have the word Me'ila. In both of them, we have the idea that it applies to all people, even to men and women. By Shevuos Eidos, it only applies to those capable of testimony. In both of them, we have by Me'ila and Pikadon, we have Nana, meaning say you're liable if you have benefit from the object in question. In both of them, there is kavua, meaning say it's a fixed carbon, it's an asham, and it's not, but Shevuos Eidos is carbon over your rate. In both of them, it's a chumash. You add on the payment, you pay, do restitution, plus you add a fifth. And asham, both of them, it's a carbon asham. Versus Adra Me'edos Avleil. No, just the opposite. You should learn out from Shevuos Eidos, Shkein Chait. In both of them, it says the word Chait. Both of them are hedged. It's not sacred. Bishvua. Both of them have to refer to an oath. Tave v'kafra. In both cases, there's a claim and a denial. Va'oen. In both cases, they have the word oh. So the Gemara says Hanach Nafishin. So the Gemara says Shevuos HaPikadon. There's 6 commonalities. Shevuos Me'ila. There's only 5, and so it's more likely compare it to Shevuos Eidos. So if that's the case, why are they laughing? Why are they laughing at Eretz Yisrael? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why they laughed. Kiyasu Rav Papa. The Rav Huna, Rabbi Yeshua Mibei Rav, Rav Papa Rav Huna says, Amri Hainu Chuka. This is the reason why they laugh. Rabbi Shimon Gzera Shava Gamar. Since Rabbi Shimon is learning Gzera Shava, so what's the reason why they challenge him from the Brisa? Mala because king lost about Mishpach and Ishma, Mezik Kashogeg. From that Gzera Shava, they should have learned the law of Shevuos HaPikadon from Shevuos Eidos to say that you're also liable from Mishpach Piachem and Mezik Kashogeg once we're doing Gzera Shava. So why are they laughing? It's made to take them like Gzera Shava. Now, maybe they laughed before they saw that there's this Gzera Shava. Possibly to come like Gzera Shava, well, parach. But afterwards, once they learned this Gzera Shava, they won't laugh. The Gemara says, below. Really? Do you think Rabbi Shimon says you can't ask this question after the Gzera Shava? Rabba Bar Isi or Abanan Mantana Shevuos HaPikadon will need to dono kafara. Who's the one who says that Shevuos HaPikadon, that if it was done b'mezid, you're not liable? Rabbi Shimoni. He says, "Lo asa mezid kashogeg." So Dilma mezid kashogeg parach. The Gamar will meila the hanach nafishin. Well, mushba kanishba lo parach. So the Gemara says, okay, yeah, maybe he asked the question for mezid kashogeg because there he learned out from the Iwa. But Mishpa Kunishpa, well, that he didn't ask about. So the Gemara says, Utaheder Eidos for Tigmar Lame Pikadon. So why don't we learn out Eidos from Pikadon, Mezid Kashogeg? So once we're doing that comparison, why don't we say Shevuos Eidos? You're not liable Mezid Kashogeg. Why don't we learn out from Pikadon? Ma Pikadon Meshogeg and Mezid Lo Af Eidos Shogeg and Mezid. Why don't we say you're not liable? So the Gemara says, just like we learned that Pekadon from Meila. So the Gemara says, well, for that reason, this is why the law of Shevuos Eidos is written by Shevuos Bitoy and Tumas Mikdash with Kedushes. The Bekua Nemar by Venelam, Talon Nemar Venelam, L'chayev al Mezid Kashogeg. Specifically, the word Nelam is missing by Shevuos Eidos to say that you're liable Mezid Kashogeg. All right, we'll stop here with Daf, a beautiful Daf. We'll repeat it again at 8 o'clock, God willing.